in the modern age of communication. And he remains an explorer, an adventurer, a social entrepreneur, but most importantly, he is an environmental advocate. Some of you may have seen him as the host of Going Green on CNN International, for example. We have a common philosophy that education, especially of young people, is really the key to making conservation a reality, especially for the oceans. So Philippe is going to share with us tonight a presentation that highlights his multimedia approach to this outreach, and I think you all really will enjoy this. So it was really our pleasure this morning to share the Red Sea with Philippe and have him back in the Red Sea. But now we welcome you to KAUST, and we welcome your presentation on the oceans. Thanks very much, Philippe.
Thank you, Michael, and good evening, everybody. What an absolutely spectacular place. You all are so lucky. My goodness, I got here early this morning due to some weather challenges in Europe, but we arrived and I came. It was dark, and we got to the hotel and slept about 2 hours, and then woke up and the sun was coming up to this beautiful campus and this beautiful place, and what a privilege to be able to visit and to spend some time this morning diving in the Red Sea. I've been diving on the West Coast, off Sudan and Eritrea, but never here on the East Coast. And of course, the Red Sea was such a wonderful favorite place for my grandfather and my father to visit, and they dove all over the Red Sea back in the day. So every time I get to come here, it's a real pleasure. I'm excited about this evening, especially because this place is such a progressive hotbed of ideas and excitement and potential. And it really is a real pleasure and honor. I'd like to, of course, thank a couple folks. First, the president, whom I had the opportunity to chat with earlier today, Professor Shi, a provost who came diving with me earlier today, Stefan Katsikas, of course the vice president for education, who I also met earlier today, Jim Calvin, and then Susanna also. Thank you so much for putting this whole program together. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not thank my new good friend, Marie-Laure Boulot. Please, you have to stand up because you've done so much to make today so wonderful for me, a wonderful experience. Thank you. It truly has been a wonderful adventure today. And my father always said, adventure is where you lead a full life. So to give you a little bit of an idea, as Michael said, I have some slides, tell you a little about where I come from, and then a whole series of video clips to take us on a little bit of a journey of exploring some of the work that I've done over the last few years and some of the challenges that we face in the world today and some of the solutions. I am not really a doom and gloom kind of guy. I try and stay positive and really focus on solutions, so this is not going to be a treatise on how the oceans are collapsing. This is really going to look a little bit at some of those challenges, but really focus on some of the solutions. So, as you know, my father and grandfather have been or worked in this area for a very long time. My grandfather actually started out with a passion for film as a young man, and he actually didn't really know much about the environment, nor did he really care about the environment. This is a photograph of him right here, my grandfather. My grandfather joined the Navy back in the 1930s in France. And he wanted to be a pilot in the French naval aviation program. That was his dream. He had no ambition to go in the ocean, no idea, no care for the ocean. He wanted to go up. And I like to share this story because it's an inspiration for me as I grew up my entire life. Because my grandfather was one of those remarkable people who could overcome challenges like no other human I've ever met. He could turn a problem into a solution. He had this inventive mind that when life threw curveballs or challenges at him, he was really able to turn them into victories. And my grandfather, as I said, had a passion for flying and wanted to be a pilot in the Naval Aviation program. But unfortunately, in driving on the windy roads of southern France one evening, he had a car accident, missed the curve and ran off the road, and he broke his back. And the doctors didn't know whether he'd actually be able to walk initially. And so what they did is they prescribed to him to swim in the Mediterranean every day as a means to rehabilitate his body. Of course, his dreams of flying were destroyed. He was washed out of the Naval Aviation program, and this great hope of his to fly was ruined forever. Nevertheless, he managed to turn that tragedy into a victory. And by swimming in the Mediterranean every day, his captain, a man named Philippe, who my father, as a young man here, with one of the early aqualungs or scuba tanks, and as an older man here, was named Philippe after this gentleman who gave my grandfather a pair of goggles. Now this was very high tech back then, right? You didn't just go down to the store and buy snorkel and goggles and fins. You had to make them yourself. And he put on this pair of goggles and he opened his eyes and looking underwater, and it opened up a whole new world for him. And that was the beginning of a whole new world for all of us. Frustrated by the fact that he couldn't spend more time underwater, he met an engineer named Émile Gagnon, and together they took an industrial valve that had been designed to take gases under pressure on demand and bring them to ambient air pressure. And they miniaturized that valve, called it the aqualung, and it became what we now have and use today, essentially the same exact technology. The little valve in the back in the regulator is the same thing that they pioneered almost 70 years ago. And it opened up a whole new world for all of us, for the world, 70% of our planet. We knew virtually nothing, and it's hard to appreciate, especially for those of you who grew up with Nemo and Shamu and the Sea Worlds of the world, and seeing documentaries on television of coral reefs and seals and all the amazing whales, all the amazing life that exists in the ocean. Because for my grandparents, when they were young, the oceans were a virtual mystery. We had no idea, except for what we brought up in nets and the odd divers that would go down. Prior to this, it was those big helmets with big lead boots and a hose to the surface, and they'd be clomping around on the bottom like Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That was how you explored the ocean until the aqualung. And so that legacy had a big influence on me. That's me. A few years ago. My father passed away about 6 months before I was born in an airplane accident, ironically. And so I never knew my father. But I was fortunate to know him through films and books. But I did know my grandfather. And he taught me a lot of things. He taught me to always challenge the status quo, always think differently about the world. He taught me, as I said to some of the students I met with today, that tenacity is a virtue. And he also taught me that the world is changing. And it's changing quickly. I remember fondly listening to stories of his diving in the Red Sea. And you can actually see those images in the movie called The Silent World, some of you are familiar with, and The World Without Sun, which takes place here in the Red Sea in the Mediterranean 60 some odd years ago, 70 years ago now. And if you go back and you watch those documentaries, and you go back to the same places today, especially in the Mediterranean, you wouldn't recognize them. They are complete ghost towns in the ocean compared to what they look like. The Mediterranean is arguably a Dead Sea. And I said that to the students today, that angers me every time I think about it. That we, humanity, have stolen that legacy from our children. my grandfather talked to me a great deal about this, because originally for him, it was about exploration and discovery. And it wasn't until the 1960s, my father and grandfather were on expedition, and they came home from visiting places in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean that they had not visited for 10 or 15 years. And they were so shocked by the change they saw just in that period of time, from the late 40s and early 50s to the 60s, that they came back and they said, it is no longer just about exploration. It is about conservation. And that is one of the great challenges that we face today, ladies and gentlemen, is this shifting baseline. The idea that our memory of what a healthy environment is generational. And that if you go back several decades and take a baseline, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, there's no area in the world that is pristine. And if you go back 50 years hence from there, even more so. And we captured this in a documentary that I did, a short piece for a larger documentary that we did when we visited the Florida Keys about 4 years ago. And ABC News in the United States called me up and they said, we want to profile some of the work that you do, and we would like to go to somewhere that we can show the change in the health of the environment over time. And I said, I know just the place. Because I know an individual who has video footage from the 1980s of the Florida Keys, an area off Looe Key, off of Key West, no? One of the Keys. Anyway, I think it's Key Largo, actually. And we can go back to that same place today, video that same coral area, and you'll be shocked by the change. And so we did. We went down with ABC and we filmed it. And this video is a short clip to give you a little bit of a sense of that shifting baseline. Woo.
What's different about the Cousteau message today is the urgency required to save some of the ocean's most vital ecosystems. Coral reefs, home to 1/4 of all marine life, a major source of food for the planet, a natural barrier that protects coastline from hurricanes, are virtually disappearing from the map. Scientists predict they may be extinct by 2050. Philippe took me snorkeling in the reefs of the Florida Keys to witness their devastation firsthand. Are you ready, Mr. Cousteau?
Let's do it. Allons-y.
Right here we are on the third largest barrier reef in the entire world. They think there's about 200 miles here. They think that about 80% has been destroyed.
The Florida Keys is classified as a dead zone by the United Nations Environmental Program.
To my untrained eye, the reefs were obviously brown and dead in spots, but still majestic, with schools of yellowtail, parrotfish, even a barracuda.
I gotta tell you, it feels good. It's great to swim right down there with a barracuda.
I know, we saw that massive barracuda. It was huge.
It wasn't until afterwards, when we put our footage side by side with footage of the same reef shot in the late 1980s, that the devastation was shocking.
In a vacuum, this doesn't look so bad, especially for someone that's never been diving before, never seen what a coral reef looks like.
What kind of fish are this?
Those are tanks, blue tanks.
Do we see those?
Nope, I didn't see one. And this beautiful French angelfish.
And this
Just fantastic. I didn't see any of these.
and the
down
water
here.
is much murkier.
All those bits of gray, kind of dead rock, is this elkhorn coral that has just died and collapsed and crumbled. This is what we inherited, and this is what we're passing on to the next generation.
My favorite part of the newspapers is the comics. I'm going to admit that right now, so thought I'd insert that. But it's true. You think about this, this is a very appropriate history lesson, ladies and gentlemen, of the world that we live in. The Florida Keys is not an exception. It is the rule. And that theft of this global heritage we have inherited happens right around the world. So the world is changing, was one of my grandfather's great lessons. And one of his greatest concerns toward the end of his life was the challenge we face with population. Now I want you to look at this graph here, which is a little bit off the screen. 0 AD. There's a 2 right there. 200 million people, roughly, to our best estimates, lived on this planet. You fast forward 1,900 years to about 113 years ago, 1.6 billion people lived on this planet. Fast forward another 112 years or so, 7 billion. Keep going. United Nations estimates that by the middle of this century, 9.5 billion people will exist on this planet. And ladies and gentlemen, consider that. We face today the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. We've had to deal with war and famine, disease on regional levels. But we face a global catastrophe. What happens when you put too many people in a bank vault? The planet is like one big bank vault. There's only so many resources today. Only so much water. There's no more fresh water today than there ever was, or ever will be. When you think about the challenges with carbon, etc., we live in a world that is changing more rapidly than the human species has ever had to deal with, has ever had to adapt to. Now, it was Christmas time not long ago, and in the States it's a big deal, and you hear a lot of people talking about what they need. I need a new phone. I need a new car. I need a bigger house. I need new clothes. And I always like to remind people, no, you don't, actually. You only need 3 things. You want everything else. 3 things: food and water, shelter, and other people. Now, as we know, other people, well, there's plenty of those. Shelter, that's not such a problem right now. Unfortunately, this, arguably the most important of all those items, and this one in particular, the most critical substance on planet, more valuable than diamonds, than oil, than gold, is water. The richest man in the world will give all of his money away, all of his belongings, if he's dying of thirst, for a cup of water. And yet today, more than 1 billion people don't have an adequate supply of fresh water. This is the crisis of the 21st century. And the United Nations estimates that most of the people coming into this planet over the next 30 to 40 years will come into areas of the world that don't have an adequate supply of fresh water. And that, thanks to climate and other changes going on, there will be diminished access to fresh water. And that number could climb from 1 billion to 5 billion without an adequate, reliable supply of clean water. Today, it's the #1 killer of children under 5. And when you consider that the genocide in Darfur was largely a battle and a crisis over water, you consider that this is a problem we face today of monumental and unprecedented proportion and scale. Think about food. We as a species, just to feed the coming 2 billion people, have to increase our food supply by 70%. Now, you might ask, why 70% to feed 2 billion more people? That is why. Ladies and gentlemen, the projected growth in meat consumption here on this planet is going to double by 2050. Completely unsustainable. The amount of energy, resources, and water that it goes to growing meat, creating meat, at that scale is completely impossible to achieve in any kind of sustainable way. So food and water, big challenges that we face going forward, as more and more people around the world want to live with McDonald's every day, want to live with sausages in the morning and burgers in the afternoon and steaks at night every day of the week. I don't know how many of you have been following the news, but I believe the greatest environmental challenge that we face is carbon. And I don't say climate change for one obvious reason, because it's only half the problem, but because carbon is contributing to both climate change and ocean acidification. This is a map of Australia, of course. And if you've been following the news, then you know that over the last few weeks, they added a new color to the top, two colors actually, to the top of their temperature range. This purple right in the middle here. Unprecedented. Meteorological organization in Australia added a new color to signify 54 degrees Celsius, which is now their new highest heat index. Never before. The world is changing. And the oceans in particular are in decline. And not only are they in decline, and when you think about ocean acidification, which for those of you who don't know, is the oceans are a carbon sink. They absorb carbon out of the atmosphere. And for a very long time, we thought that was a good thing because they've absorbed maybe half the carbon we've put in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. This is a good thing. This is helping to stop or at least mitigate climate change. Until we realize that as the oceans absorb carbon, they become more acidic. Uh-oh. Because as they become more acidic, all those, slightly important animals like coral, planktonic creatures, krill, pteropods, small ocean swimming snails, shrimp, oysters, clams, anything that creates a shell, its ability to extract calcium carbonate, bind those molecules in the water column as the ocean becomes more acidic, declines. In other words, they can't build their shells. That's a slight problem because shell-based organisms provide the basis of oceanic food chains and all the way up, affecting things like everything from whales to the smallest fish. Ocean acidification is a lesser-known crisis. We like to call it the other carbon problem, or oftentimes referred to as osteoporosis of the oceans. But carbon and climate change are big challenges facing the ocean, along with overfishing and development, etc. And yet, in spite of all these challenges, or on top of all these challenges, you might be shocked to know, though I doubt, this audience is pretty up to speed, there's still a lot we don't know about the oceans, about our own world. We like to say, I think a lot of people assume we've figured it out, that space is the final frontier. When in fact, we've only scratched the surface. How many people, I'm going to ask a question because I can see reasonably well in the eyes. How many people have we sent to the moon, ladies and gentlemen? Raise your hand if you know the answer. Sent to the moon, right here. 11. 12. How many people have gone to the bottom of the ocean? Deepest part of the Marianas Trench. Nope. Try one more time. 3, yes. 3 people. James Cameron most recently, and 2 other individuals about 50 years ago. So he sent 12 people to the moon, 3 people to the bottom of the ocean. About a year ago, as part of my work with CNN, we were invited to do a documentary, and we decided to go up to the Arctic to do a documentary. And with an organization called Catlin Arctic Survey. What they realized in 2009, this organization that was funded by an insurance company, is that no early springtime research has ever been conducted in the Arctic. Summer research, indeed, on vessels, on boats, because scientists assumed that the action in the Arctic was in the summer, when the ice was melting. That's when the research needs to happen, because that's the business. And we ignored the winter and early spring, believing that the ice was a cap on the Arctic Ocean, and thus nothing interesting was happening. The only problem is that none of our scientific models were able to predict the speed at which the Arctic ice caps were melting. And scientists were confounded. They didn't have the answer. And so somebody said, finally, well, maybe we should do a little investigation in the early spring and see if there's anything happening here. So for a budget of about $1.8 million, bless you, for a budget of about $1.8 million, this scientific team started doing research in the early spring in the Arctic. Now think about that. 2009, okay? 2009, no government, research institution had ever thought, well, let's see here. The Arctic is the air conditioning unit of this planet, the smallest and shallowest ocean, but arguably the most important. And we've never done research in the early spring. We've never found $1.8 million, or $2 million, let's round it up to $2 million, to go and explore a part of the world that affects every single human in this room every single day. Can anyone tell me what a cruise missile costs? $2 million, roughly. Tomahawk. And 150 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched in one day of one conflict last year alone. So think about that. No nation, institution ever thought it was a worthwhile investment to take the price and value of one Tomahawk cruise missile and go and explore a part of the world that affects every single human being. Until finally an insurance company stepped up to do it. Talk about misplaced investment. So we went up there, and this is a little video clip of the experience. Definitely a different place than here, though also a desert, just a little colder. Oop.
I've come to the Arctic Ocean near the North Pole on a vital mission. Here, a handful of scientists are braving brutal conditions in their search for answers about climate change. Join us on this incredible journey through a land of extremes. I'm Philippe Cousteau, and this is Extreme Science. Quite a bustling scene here. Everybody's in a great mood. We've got people bringing gear off, people putting gear on. So this is quite a wonderful opening to an amazing adventure.
Well, this is home sweet home for an entire week. It's an unheated tent, so of course I'm dressed in all of my Arctic gear. We are literally right on the ice.
We've been at this for about 7 hours. Half dozen people on shifts. We have maybe half an hour to go. It's like minus 20 degrees out and I have a thin fleece on. This is hard work.
This hole is for experiments. So what we're going to be doing is taking samples of seawater and collecting organisms that live in the seawater.
Only 5 feet of ice separates me from the frigid waters of the Arctic Ocean below. Trekking through this barren land, it's hard not to imagine that I'm walking on the surface of some distant planet. But the irony is that we know more about Venus or Mars than we do about this part of the world.
Okay, go ahead down.
What is your goal of sampling the water at 200 meters?
Well, we've been sampling at lots of different depths to just try and understand what's going on in the whole water column below the sea ice.
I think as we are observing a change in the character of ice that covers the Arctic Ocean, I think it's really important to understand how that change in ice character is affecting carbon dynamics in this really important system.
Washed my hair, so this is just a final rinse.
Never washed my hair in minus 35 degrees before, but Helen is showing us how it's done because cleanliness is next to godliness. Oh, that's hot. Woo!
That's pretty much how it's done.
It was that cold. And let me tell you, she didn't, it's not like she stood there with her hair down for a little while. I mean, she took it out, dried it off, and then stood up, and it was sticking up like that. Minus 35 degrees. One night it got down to minus 55 degrees. So Celsius and Fahrenheit is about the same at that degree. So that was very cold. Anyway, very different from here, but a wonderful, fantastic place of the world. And being up there, the research now and the results of that science that's coming out is showing that indeed in the early spring there is carbon dynamics in the ice, that there is changes in the flow, and that the ice is not only shrinking in size like this, but it's shrinking in thickness, thus allowing more light through and changing photosynthesis of algae and causing some serious challenges, and may be a major contributing factor to why the ice is shrinking faster and heating up faster. And yet, until 2009, in all of our wisdom, we never thought to invest in exploring that. And who knows how many other mysteries abound around the world that would help us understand how the world is changing and be able to adapt to it. So, as I promised, it's not all about problems, though, right? It's about solutions. Because it's too lovely of an evening to talk just about problems. And what are those solutions? There are many. But I think in particular, research and education. I travel around the world, and I run in the United States. One of the organizations that I'm involved in, I founded and co-founded and run as president is Earth Echo International. We're one of the leading youth environmental education groups in the United States. And one of the students asked me earlier today, they said, how do you think young people can have an impact, can create change? And my response is that truly, young people are the only ones who can. Young people are the leaders not only of tomorrow, but of today. And institutions like Cousteau, educational organizations, are the key to empowering that generation, not only with the knowledge and the means to become more sustainable stewards as they get older, but I can't tell you how many people, how many adults come up to me, and parents from around the world, and say, you know, we're doing recycling. We eliminated plastic bags. Green team, I love what you did with the recycled bags, by the way, reusable bags. It's one of my pet peeves. I hate plastic bags. We're engaging in renewable energy. Whatever it is people are doing, parents are doing it at home. They tell me that the number one reason they tell me is not because of education or documentary or something like that tried to reach them directly. They say because their kids came home from school and they demanded it. And if for no other reason than just to get them to leave me alone, we caved in. As a friend once told me, he said, enter into a moral argument with a 13-year-old and you are probably going to lose. Education is absolutely fundamental and critical. A couple months ago, we were in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. This is the latest episode of Going Green, and I edited it. I had it edited this week down to about a 4-minute clip to show you, because we were looking at research that's happening in the Great Barrier Reef, leveraging technology and a way to bridge the gap between scientific knowledge and public knowledge. And I'm very excited about this because another student asked me earlier today, are you technocentric or ecocentric? And I answered both. And I have great hope for technology as both being a source of problems but also a source of solutions. My grandfather was a tech guy. He loved technology. And I remember I was 9 years old when the first Game Boy came out, the handheld, Nintendo handheld gaming device. Anybody who remembers it remembers that the screen was like this big. And they actually, get this, you guys won't know this, they actually sold a magnifying screen to put on over it so you could see it. Ridiculous. I mean, your cell phones have a bigger screen than this. In any case, it was the coolest thing ever. I'm 9 years old. I'm having dinner with my grandfather in New York. And, you know, after like an hour of conservation and talking about the world and oceans, I'm 9. I'm like, come on, give me a break here. You're killing me. All of a sudden, my grandfather looks over at me, and he goes, now what about that Game Boy? And magic words. I perked right up. I was like, Game Boy? Yes. Very excited. He knew more about it than I did. I have no doubt that he spent many hours playing Tetris himself, as I'm sure many of us did in this audience. And he wasn't just fascinated for its entertainment potential as a game. He was fascinated by technology as a means for education. And I can only imagine what he would have thought of cell phones and smartphones today and how he would have been using them, which is why we were excited about this project and this documentary that we did, exploring how new technology is helping us bridge the gap between scientific and public knowledge and explore ecosystems in ways that we never dreamed possible just a few years ago. We're in the water with the researchers of the Catlin Seaview Survey. Their mission? Map the world's coral reefs, creating a comprehensive study for scientists while giving the rest of us a chance to see their work in real time. 360-degree panoramic images that will soon be used by researchers monitoring the effects of climate change are already available on Google Maps. And a social media campaign connects the team with more than 2 million followers online.
Normally we can get the images that we've taken on the dive up within the hour, up on the internet.
It's a new approach to science that project director Richard Vevers says should become a model for future research. This is pretty radical from the perspective of science and research to be having this much of a consistent and immediate online presence.
Yes, and we wanted, I mean, that is an essential part of the Catlin Seaview Survey. It's really about trying to communicate the science as much as doing the science itself.
Coral reefs are a source of food and income for over 500 million people in more than 50 countries. But for most of us, they remain out of sight and out of mind. And the neglect has taken its toll. Overfishing, pollution, warming ocean temperatures have all contributed to what scientists are discovering is the reef's rapid decline.
We had a paper published done at the Australian Institute of Marine Sciences that shows that half of the coral on the Great Barrier Reef has disappeared over the last 27 years. That's a momentous change. And if we continue on that pathway, the Great Barrier Reef will largely not have coral on it.
The Catlin team says waiting to share results simply isn't an option. The future health of the reefs needs to be understood now, and not just by researchers.
There's amazing scientific work being done, but it's being read by up to sort of 100 people rather than the world. And we wanted to bridge this gap. Well, we need to bridge this gap between scientific awareness and public understanding.
The tool that has helped the Catlin team see the underwater world more clearly, and in turn has helped educate the public, has been the SV2. Christoph from the Catlin Seaview Survey team is going to show me how to use one of the most high-tech and revolutionary ocean exploration devices in the entire world. How does this work, Christoph?
So we're using this camera as part of the Catlin Seaview Survey to do our transect along the reefs in shallow water, anywhere between 7 to 9 meters. And this enables us to cover large distances that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do.
So is that specifically what makes it so revolutionary, is the speed and the ability to travel over long distances? The cameras also, though, are pretty unique.
Correct. That's a combination, really. It enables us to create these 360 degrees panoramic shot every few seconds over long distances. So to give you an example, we typically do our transect over a couple of kilometers, and over that distance we create about 900 to 1,000 panoramic images every time we go for a dive.
SV2 is a game changer because it's automating high definition images at a scale which has not been done before. You'd be taking 100 years to do this with normal divers out there with normal cameras.
for most of it, the oceans are really out of sight and out of mind, and really this technology that we've got here with this camera really will give the opportunity to scientists, both scientists and the public at large, to really explore the reefs.
So it's not just about education and research, but embracing technology and thinking differently. And I thought this was an interesting clip simply because of the nature of Cousteau and the audience, and just how amazing when you think that utilizing this technology, as Ove said, you can do a transect of a reef a kilometer long that would take divers hundreds of dives to do, and you can do it with 2 people in 1 dive. You can upload it immediately to the internet, and scientific programs that they're writing now are able to map and look and recognize different species of coral in photographs and video, map exactly what those coral are, and catalog them, all automatically. Again, a process that would take an individual a year to do 1 transect could be done in minutes with computer programs. But all the technology and education in the world is insufficient when you look at coastal and ocean conservation unless you're engaging with indigenous local communities. This is a lesson that we've learned time and time again. The grass tops, dictation from government down, creating marine protected areas, a resource and a solution that I hope and believe should be implemented here in the Red Sea, is only partially effective unless the local community is engaged. This summer, as part of my CNN work, we went and did a documentary on a project in the Sea of Cortez, which is a narrow strip of water between the Baja Peninsula, the arm that comes off of the Southern California and Mexico, and the mainland of Mexico on the Pacific side of the country. Sea of Cortez, or the Gulf of California, has about 13 to 14,000 artisanal fishers in that area of water that have pretty much cleaned it out. The people go further and further out, spend longer and longer in the ocean, and come back with less and fewer fish. There is only 1 healthy hard coral reef left in the entire area, the entire region. And that is called Cabo Pulmo, in the southwestern part of the Sea of Cortez. A remarkable community where about 30 years ago, one of the village fishermen, it's called pulmo for lungs, because originally it was oyster diving and oyster fishing until they fished all the oysters. Then they started regular fishing, which was abundant for several decades and started to decline. And one day they recognized that more and more fishermen were going out, spending money on fuel, and coming back empty-handed. And it was, I believe, the late 70s when a group of people came to Cabo Pulmo from Cabo San Lucas, which is just about an hour south, and they said, "We want to go diving and see your reef." And the fishermen said, "Wow, you'll pay me to just go and look and take pictures? You don't want to take any fish?" They said, "No, we don't want to fish." I was amazed. And one of the young men said, "This is an opportunity." And he went to Cabo San Lucas and he learned to scuba dive and become a scuba diving instructor and started bringing people to Cabo Pulmo. And after a few years, they started to build an industry of diving there. Very small grassroots for the community, about 100 people. And then, with the support of the University of La Paz, Mexico, and nonprofit organizations, they petitioned the government to create a 70 square kilometer marine protected area, no take. No fishing allowed. Absolutely remarkable. 20 years later, almost 20 years later, it is the most well-managed marine protected area in the world, enforced by the local community, a draw for tourists from around the world. And as one fisherman told me, we realize that if you go out fishing and you come back without fish, you don't get paid. But every time you take out a diver, you get paid. I'll play this for you. Short little video clip again from that. So I think it's particularly relevant here in the Red Sea also, with the abundance of artisanal fishers and many similar challenges that the Gulf of California has faced. Cousteau owns one of the dive shops in Cabo Pulmo, and he remembers the reef before it was protected.
We saw less fish, and it was too hard to fishing, and we didn't go too far. We didn't use more gasoline, and some days we come back with don't have any fish.
He and other members of the Castro family worked with the Mexican government to protect the reef.
And we asked about the option. We want to make a reserve here, Cabo Pulmo, and one day they say, okay, National Marine Park, Cabo Pulmo.
It's morning in the small village of Cabo Pulmo in Mexico. The shops are opening for business, and I'm getting ready to meet a man who's been working on the coral reef at Cabo Pulmo for almost 20 years. This is Octavio Aburto, a research scientist at Scripps University of Oceanography in San Diego, California. He started working in Cabo Pulmo when he was a student at nearby La Paz International University. Octavio,
How are you?
I'm good. Very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you too.
And what have you found here at Cabo Pulmo? Why is this place so special?
Well, there are two things very important. One, Cabo Pulmo is the only place or the only reef here in Baja California Sur that has a great coverage of hard corals. There are several volcanic dikes, and on top of that dikes there is a lot of hard corals. But the second thing, and probably the most important, is that the people from Cabo Pulmo almost 17 years ago decided to stop the fishing.
Octavio attributes the reef's success to the fact that this marine protected area is no-take, meaning fishing is not allowed. According to the Pew Charitable Trusts, fewer than 1% of marine protected areas in the world are no-take. So it seems to me that Cabo Pulmo is a perfect example of the need to balance environmental health, social health, and economic health. That true sustainability requires all of those three things and can be achieved. It just has to be done in a way that takes into consideration the long-term health of these ecosystems.
I think this is the most important message that Cabo Pulmo is sending to the rest of the world, that you can achieve the three things and not only one.
Octavio has been working with the Castro family in Cabo Pulmo since he started studying this area.
I think they never imagined how beautiful or how amazing reefs they will create after stopping the fishing. And now many divers from around the world, they want to come and see the spectacle of Cabo Pulmo. Let me tell you one story. I came to the Gulf of California inspired by some of your grandfather videos, and he said that the Gulf of California was is the aquarium of the world, but in all my dives I didn't see what inspired him to put this name to the Gulf of California, only until I started diving in Cabo Pulmo. Since 2006, I understand maybe what he saw 30 or 40 years ago.
3, 2, 1. The reef is about 60 feet or 20 meters beneath the surface, and immediately I see what Octavio was talking about. Huge schools of fish and dozens of colonies of coral. This hard coral can look like rocks, but these are actually tiny animals related to jellyfish and sea anemones. Their tentacles pull plankton into their stomachs and push away the waste. And as divers, we stay away from the coral. If I were to touch one of these colonies, I could kill it. And one of the reasons the coral is so vibrant here is because there are healthy populations of herbivore fish that eat underwater plants. They keep the algae and seaweed in check so the coral can thrive. And in overfished reefs, the lack of herbivore fish means the vegetation grows unchecked and can smother the coral, killing it. Once the ecosystem collapses, the surrounding fisheries continue to deteriorate. This domino effect is taking place all over the world. but not here. I've been diving all over the world, and I have to say that Cabo Pulmo took my breath away. Schools of Trevally Jack that would fill this auditorium. Huge grouper. And what was fascinating, as you heard, is that it took about 5 years and patience of the local community before they saw any changes. And now there's 1,000% increase, documented, 1,000% increase in biomass, in living stuff on that reef since they established the marine park. It works. 70 square kilometers. When I met with Professor Shi earlier today, he and I spoke about the types of potential leadership opportunities for conservation of the Red Sea. And we spoke at length about marine protected areas. And I talked about this story and this example because there's a growing body of work that really proves MPAs work. And not only do they work from an environmental perspective, but the fishing just outside the boundaries of the Cabo Pulmo Marine Park has improved year after year after year as the spillover from that no-take area begins to repopulate areas that were completely decimated. And our discussion and our challenge was that CAUS could be a dynamic leader in working to establish an effective and enforced marine protected area in the Red Sea. Wouldn't that be a worthy, laudable goal? So solutions. Working with grassroots communities, education and research. And the last one that I will touch upon is the importance of empowering women and children around the world. This is a photograph of work we did in Indonesia for a series called Expedition that will be out on CNN later this spring. But we know, if we go back to the challenge that we face with respect to global population growth and limited dwindling resources, that when you empower women with education, as this university is a shining example, when you empower them with education, with family planning, with knowledge and control, they choose to have smaller families, more sustainable families, and put thus less stress on the environment, improve the health of their communities, and everybody wins. Empowering women is a key towards building sustainability in the future and today. But as I wrap up here, because my hour's up, solutions. Money. How do we pay for all of this? And I just want to plant a little nugget in something that I'm very excited about in your minds that I've been working on the last 6 months or so, last 4 years actually, we just launched it 6 months ago. In the United States, charitable giving is about $300 billion annually, roughly, give or take. And U.S. financial markets are $25 trillion. So there's no extreme growth that's going to happen. This number is not going to change drastically anytime soon. It's a tiny little sliver of that pie. But as institutions, companies, and individuals are starting to realize, there are resources and opportunities out there to invest money, to make money that aligns with your values. It's called impact investing. And over the last few years, it has grown to $3 trillion, about 12.5% of the total financial markets in the United States. So impact investing can be anything from microloans to just looking at the different companies that you invest in. And this is a huge potential for growth. We were talking earlier about the challenges of raising money, the challenges of doing research and of doing science. Where do you find that $1.8 million to try something brand new? And this, I believe, is the key. Impact investing and a world where financial markets dwarf charitable giving as a new tool in our tool belt to find innovative new ways. And for those of you young people out there, we won't all grow up to be scientists, but those who are interested in financial markets, those who are interested in corporations and being CEOs, there are opportunities to not just make a lot of money and then give it away, but to find ways to make that money in a way that improves the world. And for example, 6 months ago on the New York Stock Exchange, we launched an investment fund that has outperformed, as of Friday, Apple and Facebook when we launched 6 months ago. And it is an impact investment fund. And we walk the walk. I give this as an example because I'd only like to throw things out there that we're actually doing. And it's an example of the potential to drive dollars, pensions, endowments for universities and organizations to think about how they're investing their money. The potential for change is staggering. And I encourage all of you who may have investments yourselves, who may be in charge of institutions like Cousteau, who look at endowments and pensions, etc., to open up that side of the ledger and start to explore ways in which those dollars can be leveraged to change the world as well. We launched our program at the Clinton Global Initiative on stage with President Clinton just in September. And we're very excited about the potential. My personal mission in life is to help people understand the power they have to change the world. And that unites everything that I do, from the media to the social entrepreneurship to the consulting work that we do to the investment funds that we have to the education work that I do. All of it is helping people in different ways of their lives, be it through their finances, be it in education in the classroom, learning about issues on television, to understand the power that they have to change the world. And I just wanted to end with my favorite video clip of all my father and grandfather's films. It's the last film that my father produced and created, The Nile. I understand some of you have watched it perhaps recently. And this little clip right here is my challenge to you. To see the world constantly in a different way. To fight. To see something that we may take for granted, but to approach it in new ways through innovation, to find solutions. And that's what this video clip means to me. And you'll see my father, he's the one later, not the gentleman right here, but who's in the tank, who helps a young man go snorkeling and see his world in a different way. And this sums up that challenge.
Yet both in years of want or plenty, the waters of the Nile are so clouded with sediment that none of the shilluk have ever observed the fish they catch swimming in their natural habitat. To film some of the Nile species and display their underwater behavior to the tribesmen themselves, Philippe and Dominique have assembled a portable tank. Into it now, one by one, are placed the various living specimens netted by the villagers. Among them, a formidable predator, the tiger fish. Adorned by their characteristic rows of beaded scars, the villagers watch as Philippe demonstrates the use of a diver's snorkel. Below the surface, the captured fish swim in this strange new environment. Nile perch that sometimes grow to 150 pounds. Tilapia, whose tiny offspring in times of danger take refuge in the father's mouth. The catfish, equipped for the Nile's clouded waters with the feelers by which it probes its way along the bottom. Eager to try this new device, one of the young villagers dons the snorkel to explore a world which has been beside him all his life, but which he has never seen.
So that's the challenge, ladies and gentlemen, for all of us, is to see the world and explore the world around us every day and see it with new eyes in new ways. So with that, my hour, about 50 minutes, is up. But I'm still here because there's an opportunity to hear from you, what you care about, to ask me questions, to engage in some dialogue, which I look forward to. So with that, take it away, please. Who's first? Well, that was easy. Thanks, everybody. Just kidding. Can't be that easy. I'm sure there's a mole in there with the question or comment. Don't be shy. Because I can talk for another 20 minutes. I really can. I'm threatening you. Okay, here we go. Yes. How did I learn about my father's legacy? And for those of you who want to ask, yes, these are live, so you can come down to the mics so everybody can hear the question. But to summarize, my father was an amazing man, and I was lucky. A lot of people lose their parents and may have a couple photographs, maybe some home videos. But I had those documentaries, the books that he wrote, the films and the stories. So it was really my mother who kept his vision and his work and legacy alive for me, and inspired me so much to do what I do today. I guess I was very thorough then. It was very easy. Oh, yes. All right, you're in the middle, so you have to speak up so I can hear. Well, in some cases, banning plastic bags, for example, that's relatively easy, though, in a representative democracy. In the United States, they've tried to ban plastic bags, and, you got the lobbies that come out, and you got the people that come out, and they complain, and then this, and then that, and you have the town halls and the town council, and nothing ever gets done. But it has happened in some communities. L.A. is banning plastic bags, believe it or not. L.A. County, San Francisco, other parts of the U.S. are now doing that. So in that case, if it's if something simple like no more plastic bags, you can't sell them anymore, okay. When it's something complicated, like enforcing a marine protected area over 70 square kilometers, when the government has limited long-term resources to pay for rangers and people like that, then the involvement and support of the local community is absolutely essential. Because they're the ones that are actually enforcing the marine protected area. They see fishermen coming in, they're the ones that go out there and throw them out. And the word is out amongst the local community, leave this place alone. And without the support of the local community, it would be just another marine protected area on paper. And worse, if the local community is dead set against it, you can't have all the rangers in the world out there. They'd have to be out there 24 hours a day watching. And that's not a long-term sustainable solution to implement around the world. So having the buy-in of the community on a grassroots level, and of course you need to support on a grass tops from a federal government perspective to be able to provide some support, some legal framework within which the enforcement can happen. Hopefully some investment of enforcement at a federal level. But without the grassroots connection and that support, Cabo Pulmo wouldn't be a success. And most marine protected areas are not a success because either the local community doesn't support it, or it's just something on paper and nobody even knows about it really, and the government doesn't enforce it. And, oh, we signed a piece of paper, aren't we wonderful, we have a marine protected area here, but nothing's come of it because nobody enforces it, and it's a waste of time. It's not worth the paper it's printed on. So it depends. More complex problems that impact local communities, all the stakeholders have to be involved, or else it's just not going to be successful. You will have that local community find ways to undermine it. Yes, in the back.
Thank you for a very interesting and inspiring talk. I was curious, you mentioned early on in your talk that you went diving this morning in the Red Sea, and I was just interested in knowing, how did you find the condition of the Red Sea in this area compared to other places that you've been?
That was a great question. We were actually talking about that on the way back. Beautiful. The coral was everything I'd hoped it would be. Just spectacular. Fish, abundant fish, smaller than this. Lots of fish smaller than this, or about this. No fish any bigger than that. And that's a sign. When I was diving off Sudan and Eritrea, where there's not a lot of fishing, I saw huge grouper everywhere. All sorts of large species of schooling jacks, etc. So there was definitely something missing in the dive today. There were no big fish. You look around a meter or two off the reef and it was empty. Nothing. And that's shouldn't be. So already there's a problem in having discussions with people that work here for a long time and have done research for a long time, both at Cousteau and elsewhere. I know there's a challenge that we face. But you can have sustainability. And you don't have to stop fishing completely. But, this is hard for some people to swallow, maybe you just shouldn't fish everywhere. And what's great about the Red Sea, unlike the Gulf of California, that has one healthy hard coral reef and you just saw it left, the Red Sea is still just spectacular. Despite shark finning problems in the south and overfishing and some coastal development, it's still in great relative shape to other places around the world. It's still my favorite place to dive. But having a treasure like that is a privilege, not a right. And it's something that we need to get ahead of the ball on this and do something about it. And I think there's a great opportunity to establish a marine protected area here in the Red Sea, in this region, the support of Cousteau and finding ways to engage and work with the local community. It takes time. And create a model for the world and a model for this entire region. It's possible. And the research shows you don't have to shut down even a majority of fishing areas. It's a minority, but it's just giving it space to breathe. One of the big problems with spearfishing and sport fishing, recreational sport fishing, people like to go in the water, especially they keep and they're not releasing, and they take out the biggest fish they can. Well, fish biology doesn't work the same way that human biology does, right? The larger the fish are, the more fertile they are. And a fish that has been around for decades, really big grouper, can lay an exponentially more eggs than a small grouper. So the fishermen like to go out and take out the real big guys and leave the small ones. Because we like to take our understanding of the world and how humans work and just lay it on the natural world, right? Humans, the period of time they're having babies, they don't become more fertile or less during that period, right? You can have one baby at a time, or two if you have twins or triplets. But fish don't work that way. They can go from having tens of thousands of eggs to having millions of eggs. So those are the types of biological dynamics you deal with, and having an area that's just set aside where you let the big ones alone can, one huge grouper can equate to 100 small grouper, or more, 1,000 small grouper. And also there's evidence that shows their eggs are more fertile and more successful the older that they get, more likely to hatch. So marine protected areas is one of the most critical tools that we have in our tool belt for ocean conservation and protection. And I think this area is ripe for it. Does anyone disagree? Okay. Just check it. Yes. I'll repeat it. So the question was, growing up with my grandfather's films was a huge inspiration. And today there's nothing like that. And so how can we change that? And it's hard. Believe me, we try. And we do programs, and we, this is new, what we're doing with CNN, et cetera. There's a lot of noise out there, and these types of things are expensive to do. And back when my grandfather was doing TV programs, there were 4 channels. Now there's 4 million, seems like anyway. And there's still nothing to watch, right? So the big challenge is these types of things are expensive. And they're hard to get produced because you have a smaller and smaller market share, and you have fewer and fewer eyeballs, and then that's fewer and fewer dollars, etc. Anyway, so the work that we try and do is working with organizations like CNN that have money, thinking about financial markets, thinking of innovative ways to make money, create dollars to do these types of work, so that we can create that kind of content again. But then also, why we're so excited about technology. So the work that we do at Earth Echo, the nonprofit, we're expanding outside of the United States and providing these resources over the next few years to kids around the world, using the internet and technology like that helps to bring the cost down. But it's a different world than it was back then. From a media perspective, it's a different world. From a social perspective, it's a different world. And it's just never going to look like that again, unfortunately. And we're working hard to find other ways that are appropriate for today to create that kind of content and those kinds of stories. But I would say that I think that the most hopeful thing for me is kids don't need to be convinced about the importance of exploring the world, that exploration and that we've got environmental problems, right? I learn so much from going and visiting schools and the types of questions and the concerns that I hear in the audiences. I get asked, the hardest questions I'm ever asked are questions from young people. Today I got asked like 2 or 3, and I was like, geez, man. So that gives me a lot of hope, because they're light years ahead of where any of us were at that age. And so that's what makes me have hope for the future anyway. Yes. Where from all the places that I've been diving was my favorite? The Red Sea. And I mean that. A place called Shabrumi off of Port Sudan, a couple hours off Port Sudan, was the place that my grandfather, back in the late 50s, built an underwater habitat for aquanaut, for people to live for a month, to do research on the physiology of human beings living underwater. It's easier to live in space than it is to live underwater, by the way. And you can go there and still see some ruins of Conch Shelf, is what it was called. There's still the diving saucer, the little submarine garage, and you can go and dive into and look into. The air is toxic, but you keep your regulator in your mouth. And there were schooling hammerheads and huge grouper and reef, sharks. I mean, it was still the best dive to this day, the best place I've ever been diving in my life. But I really loved, believe it or not, diving in the Arctic, too. Brutally cold, of course, but diving underneath the ice. It's kind of flat on the surface, but underneath, it is like the texture. I mean, these huge pieces of ice that flow down in every color of blue you could ever imagine. And you can hear whales in the background. You usually don't see them, but you can see sea lions swimming through. And you know there are beluga whales out there and minke whales, and there are fish, and there's all sorts of life under the ice. That was an amazing experience too, but very cold. Yes. If you can reach the mic, it'd be better if you can, just so we can, everybody can hear you.
Hello, everybody. I'm a business student in Open University, and really it's concerning me how the society sometimes are not awake about what's happening. So the action can be very easy if it is supported by government, but what if it's been supported by individuals themselves? In local community here in Saudi Arabia, we need some kind of societies that support the individual in order to growing up to be a leaders. So how this is happening?
So what kind of society? Well, I mean, certainly, you know, civil society. As you saw in Cabo Pulmo, the importance of nonprofit organizations, the importance of research institutions, organizations that can provide the expertise and the knowledge to local individuals that are seeking help and seeking opportunities and information to take action and make change. So the growth of a healthy civil society is a good thing, and that is important to foster in any country. How do you have some environmental NGOs and some organizations that are supported by the public or supported by individuals or foundations or grants, whatever it may be, or innovative business opportunities and ideas or financial markets? That's critical, and without that, it's much harder. Yes?
If I use an example, it's like I was doing a project and I found out about catalytic clothing, basically. They're catalytic clothing. Yeah.
See, there you go. A perfect example. I don't even know what that is. She's like, catalytic clothing. Let me tell you about it.
So basically, there's research being done by professors in universities on creating clothing that could basically absorb carbon from the atmosphere and get it washed out into a non-acidic material. But in a way, if they need to create that like fabric or material, they would need to set up factories that would require the use of water. So what is your viewpoint on how that would affect? Because we don't have that much water, and like as you said, it's one of the main things that we need, and other people don't have it. So how would that affect, and what's your viewpoint on how do we work with that?
Well, not knowing that much about the technology or the trade-offs, you know, there's trade-offs in anything that you do, and it's just making a judgment call, right? Is it worth it to take out the carbon to how much water it takes? And oftentimes, economies of scale, technological innovation, streamlining, etc. You know, a lot of technologies when they're in their nascent beginning stages use a lot more energy or use a lot more water, and as they get refined, that is reduced. So, again, not knowing too much about it, I think that any solution is worth at least pursuing for a certain period of time. If we can get that carbon out of the atmosphere, stop putting it in the atmosphere, and protect our water.
Time for one more question. We'll do one more question.
Yeah, I was just going to say about time for one more, so go ahead.
You mentioned how you receive some of the best questions and insights from young people. I'm also an educator and have a similar experience. And it'd be great to bring young people into the social enterprise and social entrepreneurial space when they have this passion for really, you know, saving the world or changing the world for the better before they grow up and get a bit skeptical and cynical and get mortgages and all that sort of thing. So as an educator, I'd love to bring them into that space, but academic institutions often don't really support sort of social innovation education, social enterprise education for students who are, you know, in high school and so on, maybe even younger. Do you see a solution to that, a way that we can approach that from within the traditional way that we educate?
I do actually. I have a great story. Food, right? Kids at an elementary school in southern Florida that I visited 2 years ago. This is a very underprivileged elementary school, 100% free and reduced lunch, which basically means that all these kids, the government supports feeding them. Very poor community. And what happened is the teachers got together with the kids and they said, you know, we want to build some gardens and grow some food. And they did. And these are kids that most of their knowledge about vegetables and fruits was apples, oranges, and bananas that they get at the corner store. And all of a sudden, they were growing sugar snap peas, carrots, tomatoes, and it was the most popular thing at the school. And these kids were running to the garden of the stuff that they had grown to eat it off the vine. But they had so much that a businessman who was married to one of the teachers sat down with the kids and said, you know what? Let's create a business plan around selling this produce to the local community. So it was elementary school kids. They created a business plan, and they made money selling this produce to the local community, and they used that on projects that they wanted to do to improve water quality, water efficiency, energy efficiency at school. Brilliant. I've seen schools do aquaculture projects and sell those fish to local aquariums. Any of that type of work is just dreaming and scheming and thinking up anything's possible. It's really amazing. I've seen projects where schools engaged in energy efficiency programs. The superintendent of Miami-Dade schools, one of the largest school districts in the United States, said to the schools, they said, if you implement energy-saving projects, we know what your budget for energy is this year, you can keep the savings and invest it however you want in your school. You can buy computers, you can do sports equipment, you can do field trips. And so all the kids in the school got together and implemented this whole program, did energy audits, then they implemented this whole program in the school to save the energy, and then the kids got together and decided how to spend that money. So, yes, I think within a traditional educational system, there are all sorts of cool things that you can do. I think we do have one more question here, and then we're done.
I'm in grade 5 and I'm a diver, so I'm interested, but what can I do?
What can you do?
Like to help?
To help. Well, what are you passionate about? You know, that's the thing, is I always ask people what they're passionate about, right? So, you know, I studied history at university. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a marine biologist. I'm a storyteller, and that was always my passion. And I followed that passion and found a way. This businessman helped these kids at school develop a business plan. If your passion is growing things, if you hate when you look out the window and you see those plastic bags or plastic bottles, which there is exceedingly large amount of, I've noticed, here on campus, even though I understand that the tap water is perfectly good here. So there should be water, if you really need it, there should be water fountains or recycling water. I mean, the plastic bottles have got to go, people. Anyway, so if that makes you angry when you see plastic bottles on the side of the road and all over the place, maybe you should start gathering up your friends and adults and parents, start a petition, and then start looking and thinking about what kind of solutions, what are other ways that we can provide water for people, maybe refilter devices, things like that. Work with the green team, come up with ideas on what you can do to cut down plastic bottles. Then you count all the plastic bottles that are used every week and get a baseline. And then after your project's done, see what your reduction was. So it's always very important to understand your success and be able to measure your success. Or maybe plastic bags, or maybe, I don't know, any number of different things. Whatever you're passionate about. That's what we always tell people. That's it. When you walk around your community and you go, you know what, this really makes me mad. I want this to change. I don't like this. Change it. Okay. Get together. The greatest asset that you have is your friends. And are these your parents? Sorry, guys. Your parents, right? This works really well. Mom, dad. Nagging is a great tool. Use it as a force for good. right? It can be a force for evil, and it can be a force for good. Use nagging as a force for good. So find something that you care about, something that makes you angry. You like sea turtles. Maybe you love the ocean. Maybe you love whales. Maybe you love whatever. Then find out a problem, make a plan, and solve it. It sounds hard, but it's not. You can do it. Anyway, thank you guys. I kept you a few minutes too long.
Philippe, we have thank you very much for a very, very entertaining talk and very inspirational words. We do have a small gift on behalf of WEP to thank you for participating and coming all the way down here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, really.
And I've been asked just to point out two upcoming talks that may be of interest to this audience. Philippe mentioned that it's much harder to live underwater than it is in space. And tomorrow night's keynote talk is by an astronaut. So
cool.
Please come and you can compare notes and see what you think about that. I tend to agree that being underwater is a pretty big challenge as well. The second talk is that if you want to hear more about the marine world that's just right outside on your backyard, Wednesday is a Finding Nemo talk by me. So and
he's good.
In keeping in line, I really enjoyed the example about the Nile that they had there. We're going to bring Red Sea critters to you. So we're going to have Red Sea creatures in the back of the auditorium here. So if you've never been out to see what's in your backyard, come on Wednesday and we'll show you. Thank you very much and have a good night.
Cool, man.